Okay, I'll start off. Thank you all for joining Sky Community Call 13th November 2025. The usual disclaimer, nothing should be considered investment or any other type of advice. And I will do a very quick, brief intro for weekly highlights and dashboards review before handing over to Rune, who's posted some more details on the Sky Agent framework, and I'm sure everyone's very eager to hear about. Main highlights since we last spoke, which was 2 weeks ago, lots of activity from the stars. Spark keep on innovating and pushing boundaries in terms of their operational model and have proposed on the forum a strategic investment in Arcis, which is an infrastructure provider in the prime brokerage industry. So in return, together with the equity injection, they would get fee reduction, future token ownership, and really it's all about enhanced connectivity across CeFi venues to power their CDeFi strategies. Grove keeps finding and bringing new allocation opportunities to the ecosystem, and they've posted very detailed risk assessments for two very different allocation opportunities. Those will now go to the normal process that we've seen of being evaluated by the core council, and if approved, being issued with the parameters for allocations, such as maximum amount and also the CER or the risk ratios involved. Keel, who we had speaking to us a few weeks ago, busy building out their infrastructure, and they've posted technical details for the Solana bridging solution, so involving CCTP for USDS, and also what I believe is the first iteration of Skybridge for USDS, and that will be used for the initial deployments to Camino and Drift. So more details as they progress there. And we've also seen an update from Agent 4, and the Genesis capital transfer for that agent was approved in the most recent governance poll, and I expect that to be going through the next executive, which is probably up as we speak. We also saw the post of the third iteration of the monthly settlement cycle summary. Anyone interested in following revenues for both core and the stars, this is very key to follow these MSC updates. They do provide the calculations for the realized revenues during the month for both demand and supply side of the two very important primitives for stars, the demand side distribution rewards and the supply side allocation system. So worth keeping an eye on for anyone who's interested in revenue. Great to see on information sites such as CoinGecko. If you look at stablecoin issuers, USDS nicely sitting in third place behind Tether and USDC. Of course, it's a very different proposition for USDS to Tether and USDC, and it is the largest yield generating stablecoin. So a position we hope to hold on to for a long, long time. And finally, core council highlights, been bringing, as we've been doing in recent weeks, been bringing updates as we come into the end of the year period. I think the discussion is really all about prioritization. You can see as the stars all scale within their dedicated segments, it really is about ensuring they have the right support that's being processed in a secure manner. But with only 2 spells remaining in the year on Nov 27 and December 11, prioritization calls will need to be made for where the cutoff is taken for what actually happens in 25 versus is pushed to 26. For the dashboards review, just very quickly, starting with info.sky, very encouraging, as we already saw, to see how our North Star metric of USDS supply has been holding up, driven by USDS and SUSDS in particular. It almost feels like there's a flight to safety taking place in what's a deleveraging market. And actually, if I switch to analysis of what we've done across the wider market landscape, this is, the last 14 days has been one of these rare periods of outflows across venues where you see stablecoin yield. And actually, every single major venue that we track has had outflows apart from one. So SUSDS seeing inflows in a very difficult market environment. And you can see that's not being driven by superior yields. We're actually very much in the middle and actually through the period towards the lower end of yields in the market. So a positive sign, I think, in terms of just attractiveness of the proposition in the market. I'm not going to do the normal deep dive demand side analysis. You've all seen that many times. There's actually been a lot of talk on the Discord for another of the ecosystem tokens. We normally watch USDS very closely, but a lot of the talk over the last few weeks has been on the Sky token. You can, of course, see that through in the tokens category coming into Sky, where there was a lot of questions around the supply, and you'll see over the last 6 months that actually has been very stable. This is circulating supply that is shown on info.sky.money, and circulating supply is total supply less any Sky held in treasury. So, and I think there were a few questions in terms of reconciling the two. Considering all the questions that sort of appeared for Sky supply, we thought it'd be useful, and by this is an independent effort by Viridian to provide just open source June analytics to the wider community, to provide a dashboard, and I'll share the details where you can actually see in very granular detail exactly where the Sky is held. You'll see over the 6 months there really hasn't, the total supply has been very stable. From what we see, there hasn't been any significant minting or burn activity, and you can see exactly where it's being held. We've done the same for Spark, and you can see actually, if you remove the 3 big holders of Spark Proxy, Spark Multisig, and the Treasury, that reconciles against circulating supply that you'll sort of see on most info dashboards. And there's a lot of detail here. We sort of share this in the interest of anyone looking to do their own research in terms of holdings. You can also see detailed holdings of where actually the majority of Sky is held, which is either as delegated and or staked. And we hope this is useful. We keep building out these analytics for wider use, and feel free with any requests or feedback. So with that, I will hand over to Rune, who I hope we can invite to the stage to talk about the Sky agent framework and some of the recent posts he's just made on the forum.
Great. Thanks, Rajiv, and hello to everybody joined this call. Yet another Sky community call. But it's funny because when I'm looking at the people actually joining the call live, I think actually like the actual audience of like external, people that are not literally working on the team, there's probably something like 12 people or so listening, which is funny. Obviously, I know that there's like way more people watching the videos and so on, but it is like a very, very dedicated core audience that we got. And this is just, it's really just like the trend all the way back to like literally 10 years ago when we started doing this with Maker in the first place. And it was also pretty much the same thing. On calls like this, there'd be like 20 to 30 people in total and like 10 to 15 like actual, what you could say, community members, right? Who are not like actually a part of the team or getting paid by Maker or Sky itself. But that also means those of you guys here, like it's like the extreme hardcore freaks that whose heads don't just like instantly melt when you get into contact with my insane writing and naming and nomenclature and all of that stuff. So yeah, I mean, so basically, some of you may have seen that I like posted like a whole bunch of shit today, and in fact, I actually just posted something like literally right at this call started. I posted one more, which is like the protocol roadmap. It's pretty badly written because I didn't have time to spell check it, but I will do that later and I'll edit it later. But yeah, my plan is basically just like I'm gonna go through all the super deep stuff, and then any of you that want to like ask questions with it, you can do so. Yeah, I'm basically just like whatever of these like random pieces that you want to basically question or come with ideas for or just learn more about. However, before we actually get into any of this really technical stuff, I also just wanted yeah, like I mean, you will actually also see this in the posts, right? That we are adopting this new approach where basically, on one hand, what's happening in Sky now is that things are getting even more complicated. Not because like we sort of decided like it's time to make it more complicated, but more like because we are reaching a level where we need even more like we're sort of reaching the limits of our like early stage processes and scalability solutions, I guess you could say. And now we have to actually move into like the full system as it's really meant to run in the very long run. And that gets us to even more sort of esoteric concepts like halos and that type of stuff, which is the key to like how we can actually build things up like brick by brick to make the system extremely infinitely scalable. But once again, it just means like even more stuff. And so what we learned is like the way we want to approach communication is to just like fully don't talk about any of the stuff. Like don't even talk about stars, right? Which is sort of what originally was one of the things we tried to highlight about Sky when we first did the Sky launch, and it was sort of retail focused with a lot of farming and so on, which never really took off, right? It didn't really work. Although Spark has been very successful in like attracting an audience, but that's not because it's a Sky star, right? That's just because it's like a good project all by itself. And there's also this trend, and you also see that reflected in some of the concepts in these latest posts that we believe that the growth story from here is all about institutions, really. And I mean that's always been like a Maker and Sky thing, but now it appears to be even more so, to the point where there actually is no retail left in crypto. There's really only like there's institutions and there's smart money, and that's effectively it. There's not really kind of the old retail market that used to exist. Anyway, so first, before we dive into the crazy stuff, I just want to like talk about the like the new messaging that we're working with that is aimed to actually be able to explain Sky to institutions and like these very low context external audiences. So so here it is. So basically, Sky is the protocol that backs USDS, which is the world's largest yield-generating stablecoin. And there's more than 230 billion stablecoins and growing, but these all don't earn a yield, and so that capital is sort of steadily flowing into USDS because institutions and smart money they use like it's sort of known amongst those users to be the best risk-adjusted return. And then Sky uses this stablecoin business model to generate profits that are then returned to Sky token holders through buybacks and staking rewards. Yeah, that's basically like the core of the messaging, right? So mainly going into like why USDS is special, and then also explaining the Sky token. And then one of the things we're like then working on is we want to get to a point where we can talk about of course we could talk, well, it's revenue. I mean, it's very relevant to explain revenue numbers and profit numbers, but then what would be especially exciting is to be able to give projections about expected future revenue and expected future profit. one of the things I recently learned is that if you're talking to like institutions about this stuff, they don't even want to know total USDS supply, because even that is like too nerdy for them, basically. So like the real key KPIs that we should really be talking about, that an external audience will understand, is really just revenue and profit. Yeah, and then as you might see on these posts I wrote, this is something I'm going to try to start doing categorically, or sort of consistently from now on, is that every time we start talking about some crazy shit with Sky Agent Framework or whatever, which is also like Sky Agent Framework is going to be like the sort of the magic word that says, okay, if you hear Sky Agent Framework, you're about to hear some crazy shit. And then if you explain to like a normal audience, you can just say like, yeah, it's like, it's the biggest yield generating stablecoin. How does it do it? Well, it has a very advanced system called the Sky Agent Framework, and that takes care of it. And that's how it generates profits, and that's how it's so efficient, and so on. And you basically avoid going into details with it, right? And then we need to sort of train our audiences to be like, you have to be, autistic if you start to dive into what is the Sky Agent Framework. And then you get all the way to the full details, right? But we should sort of shield most people from this, actually, and just like not even confuse them with it, because it's kind of like nobody knows like Chaos Labs, right? Even though they are doing like their big reason behind Avi's success, right? That they have somebody like Chaos Labs, like doing the risk management and what's it called, Mark Seller, Avichan, and that kind of stuff, right? So basically, those pieces are more like if you really want to get into the details, right? You're actually like researching Sky. You're actually like trying to sort of technically understand it. But when you're just sort of explaining it really broadly, it's almost, less is more, right? It's enough that it's the largest yield generating stablecoin in the world. It's third largest stablecoin in the world, largest real yield generating stablecoin, best risk adjusted return. Add anything more to that, and it just gets too complicated and turns people off. Yeah, and how to convince boomers to use USDS rather than USDC with yield from Coinbase? I mean, the answer is risk adjusted return, right? Or that's what the answer should be, that you basically get a better return with USDS. Ultimately, that's that's really how you can compete with this kind of stuff. But end users like retail boomers and so on, they're just not really they're not really a realistic user that we can easily target in the end, because it's just like you're not going to have an individual like boomer sit down and actually understand how Sky and USDS works. But maybe like a fintech might, really spend the time and actually understand Sky Agent Framework and really like go through it end to end. And then they could like integrate the whole thing on the back end, right? And then that's how it could be delivered. But the sort of sad part is then what the end user would actually end up getting might not be that much different from what they would get on Coinbase with USDC, right? But that's just not like, we're just targeting, like we're more like scale focused, right? And we're sort of targeting a different type of consumer, you could say. And then of course, if USDS gets broadly enough adopted, it's going to change, and of course, then everybody will get the really good yield. But the last mile problem is like extremely real, and I think my perspective on it is that I used to think that the stars were like a realistic way to sort of deal with the last mile problem, but I'm not really like, I'm not, so far, I don't see that materializing in the way that I used to expect. But rather what I'm seeing is like institutions really do have like, they're very, very interested in this. Once they start to get sort of get the side of, get the story in a way that so they don't get completely overwhelmed right out the gate and just get turned off. Yeah. Okay. Well, is there any more any more questions? Yeah. Having a KPIs besides fees and revenue. Yeah. Totally. I mean, and there will be a post about this soon, right? But yeah, the goal is we should really have like all the top KPIs figured out. So of course, like definitely beyond just revenue and profit. No, what I'm saying is when you're trying to explain, like the point is, if you're trying to pitch to somebody, why should they care about this? The very sort of condensed pitch, right? Of like, Sky backs the largest yield generating stablecoin, best risk adjusted return, trusted by smart money and institutions. And then 150 million profit, 450 million revenue. The profit is used to buy back and Sky and provide stake rewards. That's what I'm finding so far. That's like, if you explain it that way, you can actually get people interested. Yeah, there's no KPI that proves best risk adjusted return. But what I have also one thing is, so it used to be when people are like, okay, let's get technical, let's like really dive into the shit, right? It used to then be that what I would start doing is I'd start talking about, CDPs or star agents or spells or allocation system and this kind of stuff, right? And what I have found is like, and then what happens is nobody can understand that. This is fully will not register with anybody except very, very few people. But what I have found is what you can also start talking about is just Basel 3. So that if you talk about Basel 3, like most people, they sort of don't know about it, but or maybe some people have like vaguely heard about it, but it's actually not that difficult to explain Basel 3 and credit enhancement. And that's like a different way. Like if you explain credit enhancement, you're actually sort of explaining Sky agents and star agents and so on. You're just doing it without really getting into all the complicated parts of it. Yeah, outstanding tokens. So I don't. Yeah, like currently, I can't really talk more about like basically the best number is what's on CoinGecko. Like at some point, there's going to be token burn. Is the idea? It's just like it's just not a priority compared to like growing, like basically dealing with the actual operational challenges related to generating more profits and so on. So, being able to sustain more buyback and then later figuring out the accounting for exactly how much can we burn. So I would say the CoinGecko number is the best. Like my estimate right now is that something like $35 million. Sorry, something like $35,000 worth of USDS per day is used to buy Sky that eventually will get burned. But there's like a bunch of uncertainty around it. So basically, we can't be sure about what exactly is that number. And it even like relates to like when we do spells in the future and when we adjust the amount of Sky tokens rewarded to the USDS Sky farm and what happens with the Sky price and so on. So there's like so many like variables to this basically that it's not possible to predict exactly yet. The PE calculation the PE calculation is, I believe it's based on the circulating supply. So basically everything not currently in the pause proxy. And you have to keep in mind like the stuff that the Sky tokens that are in the treasury of the system, they are basically like, even when they're distributed out, like when they're distributed out to stakers, they directly benefit the stakers, right? When they're distributed out to USDS holders, they result in an equivalent income, an equivalent cash income. Okay, but I'm gonna move on to, because there's a lot of good questions, but there's something really important I want to talk about, minimum, that I just want to go through and get into, and I'm sure there's going to be like a lot of questions related to this. So, institutional primes, which is like this new concept. Once again, there's like a new thing, and it's actually also the introduction of that made us realize that, okay, we can't even talk about stars anymore, because you can't go and tell somebody what's the difference between a star and an institutional prime and so on. And actually, really the way to think about it is really, it's more like you have an institutional prime and you have like a star prime, right? So a star is also a prime. And then you also have like a third category of like the long-term permissionless primes, or whatever you want to call them. I think actually they're referred to as open primes in the document. But basically, those are like the long-running primes that sort of yeah. Well, actually, let's forget about those for now. But so basically, stars, they are primes, stars, right? They're but this category of sky agent called a prime that have a freely trading like a crypto token. And then institutional primes, they're the same thing. They're also prime, but they have a whitelisted and controlled set of who can hold that token. And this is basically because it turns out that even though it's incredibly hard to grasp the star concept, it's just the idea is apparently so powerful that you actually have like real regulated financial institutions getting excited about it and being like, we also want to have our star. I mean, there's a big difference between getting excited about it and saying that, and then actually doing it, of course, right? So it's not like, that doesn't mean that in a couple of months or something, you will have Bank of America setting up Bank of America institutional prime. But rather that what it just reveals is there is this clear demand in the market for this type of solution, because the problem is basically that once you're a regulated financial institution, you have this like fundamental anxiety around things that aren't KYC'd or things that are sort of where you could have some kind of basically like interaction with counterparties you have no idea who are. So that basically led to the idea of the institutional prime, which really just means actually giving primes against the primes is like stars. And I'll get to a second what then is a star in this context, right? But so giving stars / primes to basically the option to say, actually, if you want to, you can choose to basically activate a sky primitive that lets you control who can hold your token. And then you can restrict who can hold your token to a particular institutional network, we call them, right? An institutional network is then just basically a sort of an approved KYC network of like accredited investors or something like that. So like a little walled garden where the big fancy institutions, they can play with each other and be sure that there's only a bunch of other institutions they're going to be trading with. And then beyond that, they basically have this like the institutional prime is essentially the same, although there's like one other restriction, which is the pioneer star system. But that's way less important. What's really is important is that they're like this, they're essentially the same thing, but the really big difference is like very much how their token will work. Where one will be this like much fewer, but way more capital, representing way more capital that you get with institutions. And then what you have on the other hand are the stars, right? And that's basically the ones that are like launched in more sort of the DeFi crypto native way, right? Where you have tokens and you have farming and they can go on exchanges and you can buy it on Binance and buy it on Uniswap. And there's a community and Discord and all of this kind of stuff, right? And there's been like a number of these stars, like Genesis stars, so stars that are launched directly by Sky. There's been like a huge amount of those planned. And what we've now done is try to cut that down as much as possible to just make it less complicated, basically, right? And be able to get us to a point earlier where we can completely stop with the Genesis capital. And then so that got us to basically a setup where we have exactly 7 stars. And those will be the only ever stars that will ever be created. And then the definition of star in this context is really just, it's basically, it's one of these initial 7 that makes it a star. Like that makes it a star prime compared to another type of prime, such as an institutional prime or a permissionless open prime. That's one thing, and then the other thing is that the stars now have the ability to, or rather, they're proposed to get the ability to become to activate the Pioneer system on multiple different blockchains. So the long-running idea is that the Pioneer system would be like it only works if you set up a prime/star specifically for that purpose. But that's not going to work if we're only going to have 7 stars. So instead, they basically, the logic is then they should be allowed to have multiple Pioneer star status for many different chains. And so this way, even though we restrict the number of stars, we're still going to have the 7 that will exist be able to go and really do a lot of cross-chain collaboration with also the different blockchains. And then what's really important is by limiting the number of stars, there's just not going to be, just like an outrageous unlimited number of endless tokens coming out of Sky, right? Even though 7 tokens, obviously, that's still a huge amount of tokens. But it means there's some kind of like there's an end to it, right? And there's like I think there's like it's going to be a good balance where then these 7 projects, some of them or maybe all of them will have a pretty good opportunity to just grow. A lot of institutional primes being created, but they're not really going to be competing for the same capital. And also the way that you will value, like a star token will be valued more like with momentum and community and that type of stuff. Plus, of course, its actual financial performance. While institutional primes will likely be valued entirely only based on their financial performance. And then as a result, institutional primes will probably also have inflationary tokens. They will behave more like equity, right? In the sense that you will use financials to value them, and then they will actually inflate and emit more tokens in order to raise more internal junior risk capital. And on the other hand, the stars have fixed supply, so they're more crypto-like in that sense. Yeah, I think that was a long rant about institutional primes. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to ask. And one thing I just want to clarify, actually, I can share my screen about this. The Genesis phase agent roadmap. There's just no news about when the first institutional prime appears, but it will be soon. Go through this, right? So basically, there will be these 12 Genesis agents in total. So there'll be 7 stars, as I just mentioned. Out of the 7 stars, 3 have been revealed so far. 1 institutional prime, and then this one institutional prime will be able to actually create more institutional primes, or rather, the system will be able to create more institutional primes, and the idea is to use this as like the sort of the starting point, right? The proof point for this. And then 3 executors, which are beloved bureaucrats that runs the governance. And then 1 generator, and that's because that's basically to like kickstart the capability of moving into other currencies than just USD. Okay, so there's a couple of questions. All right, so what has the demand been from institutions? Any projections, current offers? Like I said, I mean, basically there's been I think much more demand than expected, given how complicated it still all is. But that does not mean that has not materialized into like specific offers beyond like, well, there's been there's some stuff coming basically, but I think it's much more like it's clear, it's more like there's very strong evidence that given sort of just like a bit more making it like a bit more accessible, a bit more proven, right? And basically getting some of the really early stuff out, then there's a very good fit with what the institutions are interested in when they look at blockchain and when they look at stablecoins, which is like business models that they're used to, right? Leverage, like cheap leverage, cheap transaction fees, like sane risk management and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of potential. Okay. Next question is, as a Sky token holder, will we need to do anything other than staking the tokens to get access to these stars tokens? Yeah, for the stars, you simply stake to get the star tokens. For the institutional primes, you will not be able to stake to get them. So, and actually, one of the basically there will be like this initial institutional prime. So Sky will deploy capital to it and get tokens in return. But those tokens will not be it will not be possible to farm those tokens out, right? And instead, basically, they will be sold and just used to generate cash by directly selling them. So as a Sky holder, you don't have to do anything. You will just get the reward through the fact that Sky will just get more income from the Sky funded Genesis institutional prime. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think this is, I'm really happy to it's on one hand, it's a little, it's just yet another thing, freaking institution primes. On the other hand, it's like a very, I think it's like a very sort of salient breakthrough, because this is like, this is like this is where the interest is. Like, this is where the opportunity is. I think is getting pretty clear that it's about like figuring out how to actually connect to the institutions. And then the institutional prime seems to be like a critical building, like sort of stepping stone to set that connection up. And it's like, and there's been, there's like this sort of like not having too many stars. And then also there's this question of like basically scalability issues, right? Where there's also, it's good to not ramp up too much, because like the core system and the core governance processes, they have right now identified like a whole bunch of like scaling bottlenecks that need to be solved now. So sort of consolidating on the number of stars we have now, and then introducing the institutional prime concept, then getting it out in the market and like proving it, and then spending some time proving it, and then being ready to actually bring in institutions. I think that's a very, like, it's sort of a good strategic fine-tuning of the, it's sort of, it is very much the direction Sky was already going in, but now it's just like even more sort of precisely sort of targeting where the greatest opportunity seems to be. Okay, well, now we can get into the fun stuff of talking about the protocol roadmap. This is like the other type of roadmap. Right, so the other one was like, what are going to be, what Genesis agents are we getting? And now in this forum post, I went to town on what is like the bunch of tech that's coming. And so it's like, it is prioritized based on my current belief, but almost certainly parts of it will probably change, because this is stuff that's just, it's so insanely important to prioritize this correctly based on what the actual conditions are in the market or in the ecosystem. So, and because each component takes a lot of effort and a lot of time to build, and the sort of the sequence of how they come out is crucial. Okay, but so first we have Skylink. That has been something that's been under development for like an extremely long time, but that's about to come very, very soon, basically. And it's like there's already plenty of like cross-chain Sky activity, but what Skylink does differently is that it begins to standardize this stuff. So it's basically more secure, and also it's more, there's like you can go directly from one Skylink to another. You don't have to like go through Ethereum mainnet. Yeah, and then it's also and it also means it will be faster to set up bridges to new chains and L1s. So we can also go to new L1s, and then by unlocking the sort of the updated Pioneer star primitive, so that stars can have multiple Pioneer chains. That just means we can expect to see even more cross-chain action with once Skylink is ready and we have the new Pioneer star system, and we have even more stars than now that are all out there closing deals. Then we have SR-USDS. So this is actually like this is one of like the most impactful things that are going to be, that are going to that are on the horizon, and that will just like have a huge benefit for the protocol. So what SR-USDS will do is, first of all, it will introduce a new risk capital token. So similar to ST-USDS, right? Which actually resulted in, I guess it's over 100 million, right? So that product by itself increased USDS supply by about 100 million. And then also unlocked a lot of stuff that can happen when, with staking borrow, which of course is like a very reflexive feature. So right now, because the Sky price is still not really doing anything, it's not, it's not making a big difference. But if you actually start to see more activity and more Sky trading and more interest in Sky staking and that kind of stuff, then we could see ST-USDS having a much bigger impact. So SR-USDS is going to be sort of like ST-USDS, but then instead of providing liquidity to Sky stakers, it essentially provides liquidity risk capital to the stars. And oh yeah, this needs to be cleaned up a little bit the way it's written. But basically, so the SR-USDS holders, what they do is they kind of build this big pool of capital that's going to sit in front of, you could say, the surplus buffer of Sky. And so what that means is, if a star is completely destroyed, right? If it becomes insolvent, and then all of its governance tokens are inflated, and if the price of the governance token goes to zero, then if there's still an insolvency, like if there's still a hole left with bad debt, that could, can be filled even after selling all of the star's assets and literally liquidating them fully, then that remaining loss is then absorbed by the SR-USDS holders. And then only if the loss is even bigger than the SR-USDS holders' total funds, do Sky then take losses on the surplus buffer. And in the short run, this is going to be used to basically just increase the amount of capital that can absorb losses in front of Sky token holders in the system during the time where the surplus buffer is negative, which is going to happen very soon. Like it will basically happen in 4 days when the next spell goes through. That'll be the first time that the surplus buffer goes negative, right? And this surplus buffer going negative is very important to highlight. What that means is, like, there's still actually, because the surplus buffer is going negative because we are capitalizing the stars with Genesis capital. But even when the Genesis capital is sitting out in the star, it's still basically sort of earmarked, or basically playing the role of backstop capital for the whole system. But it's backstop capital that's sitting after the Sky token, meaning the Sky token has to go to zero before the star's backstop capital basically gets used to plug any hole that remains at that point. So from a USDS holder perspective, the protocol is completely solvent. From the Sky holder perspective, there's like additional, there's like less of a buffer before they can take losses, basically. And that's why SR-USDS is going to be very helpful, because Sky itself will be able to use it right out of the gate to basically just essentially sort of rent, or you could say originate or something like that, like sort of get access. You get a big pool of capital that's just going to sit as a shield between any potential star insolvency and the Sky token. And then, if given what we can see with the yield on STUSDS, it seems like that if Sky pays something like 7% or so, it should actually be possible to get 200 million or more in, and that amount would basically fully cover, like easily cover, all of the negative balance of the surplus buffer, plus have a very large positive balance on top of that, right? So there really is like a large pile of capital sitting in front of Sky token holders. And then it would also just like bootstrap the token, right? So then there'd be yet another risk capital token in the ecosystem, that there would be a different type of user who would be adopting, and then eventually get integrated and would be traded and so on. And this is really helpful, because the next phase is that the stars will be able to tap into the senior risk capital. And when the stars tap into the senior risk capital, it lets them basically take more leverage. But tapping into senior risk capital is a lot cheaper than basically getting junior capital, because the senior risk capital only takes losses when the star gets completely wiped out. So it's a lot cheaper. The cost of capital is a lot cheaper with senior risk capital. So this is just overall result in stars getting a cheaper blended cost of capital. So that's really important for like unlocking scalability, to have access to this. Then there is this thing, the Skylink SSR infrastructure. So this is like an extension of Skylink that basically makes SUSDS native on all the chains that Skylink is on. Also, randomly, this system will actually also introduce the mechanism to recover people's lost DAI and USDS that were sent to the token contract. So that's like a feature that's been requested for ages, but that just turns out to be actually very difficult to build. But with this system, it could be built as sort of a little extra feature on top of the system that would be quite easy to implement. But yeah, this is not so exciting. It's more like a backend thing, but it's just going to speed up the rate, like sort of the throughput of the stars. Then there's a new buyback system, and so the idea is to use Hyperliquid, and I think there's some chat about this, maybe something else in Hyperliquid, whatever is the most liquid, right? Whatever is the biggest DEX could be used to improve the buyback efficiency, and also remove the need for Uniswap LP tokens, which currently the Frontier Foundation hold a bunch of Uniswap LP tokens just in order to maintain the liquidity so that the burn engine can function. But of course, it'll be a lot more efficient to not have a bunch of Uniswap tokens taking impermanent loss, and then instead just directly buying from market makers on a high-speed exchange. Is tokenized external junior risk capital. So this is even it's like also an advanced type of risk capital token similar to the SR-USDS. But the difference with this is that this will be individual to each star. So there won't be like a single junior risk capital token. Like a JR-USDS or something like that. And the reason for that is because when you provide junior risk capital to a star, you're like extremely exposed to that individual star. So you can't just make like a basket of all the stars. You have to kind of like choose which specific star you want to take junior risk exposure to. But it's like that's another way that then also allows how much leverage can a star get. This can really help increase that even further. Let me just check if there's any questions. Okay, and then we have isolated ESRC. So this is external senior risk capital. So this is basically like, this is the senior risk, capital concept like earlier, but then the difference is now it's like an isolated version of it. So it's like each ASE, but it's just the senior risk capital position, and then it sits pari passu with the SR USDS holders. But only for that particular star they basically choose to have the isolated exposure to. And the result is then, first of all, Sky will take a much larger cut on this, because otherwise you'd always want to choose to get isolated ESRC. It's just like superior basically to compared to the sort of the pooled SR USDS exposure. But the difference is basically Sky will take a much larger fee out of the transaction. But so it's still possible. It's just you have to pay a higher fee to do it. And then also the one, like, I would, basically the stars that will typically be chosen for somebody to take isolated ESRC exposure to will always have lower rates, right? So SR USDS should always have a higher rate than the tokenized isolated ESRC. Then there is Sky Intents, and that's just like a way to, like, we need a way to basically unify how to trade, how, for instance, the stars can trade their collateral with each other, and also just like other stuff. And this actually also includes how to make this institutional network to trade the institutional primes and so on. And yeah, so that needs to be built at some point. And this is very important. Like, it's very important because it's essential that primes actually have the tokens be very liquid. So we do need a way for them to be traded constantly. So we need some kind of system that we can also plug into KYC institutional networks, and then also just more broadly that the stars can use to market make their collateral tokens. And then finally we have the generator system, which is like a sort of a one package full solution for the entire stablecoin system for Sky. So it's basically like a rewrite of all the smart contracts and all the infrastructure that makes USDS possible right now, but heavily refactored so that it's just way simpler, because there's so many features that are not needed in the old system anymore. So this is, eventually USDS should also be upgraded to use this, but before that, this will just make it possible to actually go out and create new stablecoins with sort of a reasonable amount of work. So it's not completely crazy to make them and maintain them, compared to the kind of the aggregate work that has gone into the current Sky protocol and USDS over the last 8 years. That's it. There's of course even more stuff, but that just gets so far in the future that I think this is the kind of stuff to basically look forward to in the next 1 to 2 years. And the idea is basically to, alongside the sort of new messaging, right, we're going to create some kind of like vision, like a vision document or like vision announcement type of thing. And then basically, I mean, really like, not a long technical list of things like what I just went through, right? But give some kind of idea of like, this is what's going to happen over the next couple of years. This is the plan to grow to tens of billions of USDS. And these are like the things that make Sky special and so on. And then focus on like the simple messaging. Okay, let me see. Okay, so something about Blockworks token transparency. I actually don't know what this is. Yeah, this looks like the kind of stuff we should do with Sky. So I just clicked on that Blockworks link. Eventually we'll do that kind of stuff. We're moving in that direction where everything is just, there's been so much stuff to build. Now finally we have more time to kind of communicate and show it and so on. Then there's this question about freeze function to USDS. Currently there are no plans to do this. If it were to be done, it would be like a very complex upgrade. and then designated backup for me. So unfortunately, there's no, like, I'm not really operationally critical. I mean, my operational role is to deal with things going wrong. So that's, I mean, but that's exactly because, that's not so. I only need to do stuff when something goes wrong, which recently that did happen a little bit because we slammed into some scalability walls, but that's exactly because those were not really anticipated. And now, now they're being dealt with. And then once they're dealt with, then once again, it should basically not be the case that I need to actually do anything sort of operationally to keep things running. For the kind of design roadmap type of stuff, unfortunately, I'm like completely irreplaceable. But that's why I do what I can to sort of write this kind of shit down, right? And then, I mean, it's gonna take, like, if we, in a couple of years, it should get to a point where then it can really just be left as is, and we have to get into things like Skychain and crazy AI and so on before to really like take it to the next level. Like the basic, I mean, the things I went through here in the roadmap. Most of this has like somewhat complete designs, so that is actually just like it's basically in the works, and it's gonna happen. And my involvement is more about like speeding it up and sort of refining it and dealing, making sure that sort of various mistakes aren't made and so on. Then in terms of like the foundation and so on, basically there's going to be, there's some new, like, in the future there'll be some news on that front. But with that kind of stuff you're talking about here, like BD and so, actually you may have seen we're currently in the middle of doing a search for a head of BD. But there's also some other similar roles like that, basically exactly with the aim to replace sort of some of the roles that I play, so I can just focus more on like designing stuff. But yeah, basically this thing of like, I mean, there needs to be somebody that Sky token holders and so on can interact with, and so that's being built like a proper function in the foundation. Yeah, so Herv, we don't currently have these like the Sharp ratio and Sotino and that kind of stuff. I don't even know what the hell Sotino is, but so we will definitely get that. That's exactly the kind of stuff. I mean, we're exactly building towards modeling these things. My feeling is that it may be a little bit too difficult to do it right now because there's still like a bunch of baggage in the portfolio. There's like some legacy RWA stuff, and there's like the legacy vaults, and I expect it to be a lot more. It's like when we have moved everything to primes, well, so everything is like sitting in stars like Spark and Grove and that type of stuff. Then that will be the point where I think this will be a lot more like, and everything is following the risk frameworks, right? Everything is sort of in a Basel III equivalent credit enhancement regime. Then I think these like calculating more and more sort of standardized TradFi metrics will make much more sense. Yeah, projected USDS issuance a year from now. So we're working on being able to do these kind of projections, right? Right now, I think we lack data to be able to really. We can't really extrapolate from like current rate of growth and so on, I think. But what I do think we can do is some kind of really simple heuristic of saying, we know basically that we're going to launch 6 more star tokens, or maybe let's say 4 more star tokens, and let's assume 2 of them won't launch. And let's say each of those 4, they have like half the valuation of Spark. And then you look at how much USDS the Spark farm is bringing in, which is about believe it's 800 million right now, then you could project that the USDS demand will grow by 1.6 billion, like over the next year from the farms. I think that's like the most realistic. I think it will be much higher, but rather that's I think the extent to which we can try to predict these kind of things right now. And then what we need, I mean, again, this is what we're building up, like the capability to predict it more accurately and just getting more data. Okay, are any stars larger or similar size to Spark coming? Well, I don't understand why you think Grove is medium and Spark large when they have the same amount of capital, because I would look at the amount of capital they have. Like, I actually, so far, it looks like they will all have in the same range of capital, with basically with one exception, with one of them being potentially quite small, and the rest being in the range of like 20 to 40 million or so. But yeah, it's hard to say. Like, there's about half of them raising external capital, so it also depends on like the external capital raise. All right. Any last questions, guys? Otherwise, we can call it for the very loyal and dedicated and possibly slightly brain damaged people who will sit through a 1 hour call like this with your 11 comrades. And of course, also the rest of you guys at home in front of the TV, in front of the YouTube. Okay. Can we prioritize products that attract greater user deposits over products that give Sky greater yield? But I mean, it's like I can't really answer that question. Like, it's like the wrong question, I guess. Like, the answer is like Sky doesn't even really do products, right? It's more like we can make changes to the protocol and incentives and so on. But the exact thing we don't want to do is to start having like top-down Sky products, right? Because that's exactly the thing that we basically went away from entirely. But what is kind of what's a great example of this is like something like Sky.money, right? Which was designed to be this kind of like, let's make a retail user-focused product. And it's basically like, it's still, so many people can't even use it because of basically the legal risk around it that's still being dealt with. Eventually will be fixed, right? So eventually Sky.money will be broadly available. But also, it's just not, what we're doing right now is changing the way that the accessibility rewards work. So they're being renamed to distribution rewards, which is, that's actually a big upgrade, because accessibility reward was very confusing, and distribution rewards a little bit more like, make it a little bit more obvious that we're talking about a referral fee. And then just making it more simple and more accessible. And with the additional stars coming out, then we might see more stars basically focusing on user-facing products in order to earn the distribution reward, and also go out and do more integrations. And then, of course, there is the BD function, which will basically specialize in just going out and getting integrations in place that will be incentivized through the distribution reward. Yeah. I completely agree with Rajiv saying how crazy dedicated our tiny audience is. Yeah, I mean, again, it really takes some like really special capabilities to be able to follow along, even just like partially follow along on this stuff. I mean, I'm talking to like bankers and like, fintech geniuses and like financial engineers, and they're just like completely lost with this kind of stuff. It's just like, it's a combination, it's like a combination of like, you have to both understand tech and finance, and it's actually not really, they don't really understand it in fintech. Like, they sort of barely, it's not to the extent that we are, we're dealing with like the sort of the innards of finance, right? So yeah, We're very glad to have you guys. You're like super important to that there actually are somebody that can provide that like external look and just like be there to help make sure it's not just a complete echo chamber, right? Of Sky team insiders. It's like agreeing on like some crazy stuff that. Well, I mean, I know it makes sense, right? But it can be, it's very difficult to sort of follow along for most people. So it's very good to have a small dedicated group. And again, it's so funny that it's the same site. Like, I mean, absolutely, there's no chance that any of the people here are the people that used to sit in on this exact same type of call that used to have them also like every week. I think every Sunday, like literally 10 years ago. I mean, from 10 years ago to 5 years ago, to like 2020 or something. We used to do this over and over and over every single week for like 5 years. With the same kind of stuff, like a tiny little group, then asking like extremely advanced questions, and then me just like rambling about completely like deranged tech visions. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. And I guess we will not have a call next week, but then the week after, probably. We'll see. There'll be an update and forum and Twitter and all that, Discord. All right, guys. Peace out.